it's just something so special about being able to see the film on the big screen and to be surrounded by friends, family, the public, and having a chance to really share the story and seeing it up on screen, because I think it's the type of story that, I often tell people about this film, like it's going to feel like a warm hug.
Hello and welcome to the 2023 Atlantic International Film Festival podcast. On this episode, we will explore a film that the creators describe as a warm hug. Mr. Dressup, The Magic of Make-Believe is a Canadian Amazon original documentary based on the life and career of legendary Canadian children's entertainer Ernie Coombs, or as he's more commonly known by millions of fans, Mr. Dressup. The documentary celebrates the origins and history of one of Canada's most beloved CBC children's shows, Mr. Dressup, which enriched the lives of 5 generations of Canadians. I was joined by producer Mark Bishop. Mr. Dressup is obviously such a cultural icon in Canada. Yeah. Where did your vision come from to try and tackle telling the story of Mr. Dressup?
Well, for me, the story of Mr. Dressup is a really personal connection. I was actually one of the lucky ones that was able to meet Mr. Dressup when I was 5 years old. I grew up in just outside of St. John, New Brunswick, a town called Rossay. And Mr. Dressup came to our town because that was a big thing that he did, and I know Ernie really believed in, about using the opportunity to travel across the country and perform. He loved performing, as we found out later. But he would come to every town and put on a show. And for me, that was a moment, 5 years old, seeing him perform at St. John High School, and then having a chance to go meet him afterwards at Woolco, where he was signing records. And in fact, I still have the record hanging in my office that he signed when I was 5 years old. And that was the moment that my mom tells the story that, you can tell I talk a lot, that I talked the entire way home of like, well, how is this happening? How is he doing a show today? Who's on the air? What are they playing? How could this be happening? Because he's here and just blah, 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 blah. Right. And that was the light bulb moment for me that went off about, oh, people work in TV. There's an industry. Maybe I should get into television. So for me, it was a real eye opener and really, inspired me to the industry. And then I obviously moved to Toronto, ended up going to Ryerson, which is now TMU, to get a degree in television. When I was a student, I met Ernie. He came to our class to speak, and I had a chance to tell him that story, which was great and really, really rewarding. And I always just thought, like, he has such a great story that should be told, right? And just obviously he's so beloved by 4 or 5 generations of kids who grew up. And just always thought, there should be a way to tell this story. So this has been one of those passion projects that's been burning for a very long time, of wanting to be able to tell. For me, it goes back a long time. And, and it was one of those fortuitous moments that, thanks to social media, I happened to be on Facebook one day a few years ago, and I saw these clips popping up, and they were interviews, with people talking about their love of Mr. Dressup. So of course, I'm liking it and sharing it. And then I realized that this filmmaker in London, Ontario, named Rob McCallum, had gone and actually met Ernie's kids and, started reaching out. And I just called him up and I said, I don't know who you are, but we should work together and let's make this film.
That's amazing. With the multi-generational kind of impact he had, did you feel pressure, I guess, to kind of tell this story right?
Absolutely. There's so much pressure, and it's interesting, right? Because some people say, oh, is there dirt? Is there scandal? And I said, well, luckily, no. But it's also, that's not the story we wanted to tell. But, there's lots of people that are hunting and trying to find, who did bad things a long time ago. Thank goodness Ernie didn't. I mean, he was just a genuinely nice man who just believed in the goodness in the world and kindness and all of those values that we talk about today. And it was just so who he was. So I think there was that in terms of the story we were telling, and just really being able to, tell the story properly, like from as many different angles, and to hear a lot of different voices. And it's challenging. It's always challenging telling documentaries, obviously, about someone who's no longer with us. So, we can't ask him questions, and you have to ask a lot of other people questions, and people are getting older and they're harder to get access to. Some are no longer with us. I mean, we have people in the film that we interviewed a couple of years ago who are no longer with us. So, it is a moment in time where you have to try and capture as much content as possible, hear the voices, and then both the people that knew him and worked with him, and as well as those who really, shared that impact. And, that's what's been really exciting, is that, we've got celebrities, we've got everyday people, we've got people that were on the show, worked on the show, and just really felt that impact. And so that was a real journey to go out and find all of those stories.
One of the things you did really well in the film was tie a multitude of interviews together. Like you're saying, there's a lot of different voices. There's like a who's who of Canadian talent who are influenced by Ernie. So did you find that it was easy to get people to talk about him and kind of become emotional, regardless of whether they were A-lister or just a viewer who appreciated him?
Yeah, it was actually really exciting, and you had to go on a little bit of a journey to find some of these people and hear certain things. Like, you've seen the film. There's a clip with Michael J. Fox, and of course, Michael J. Fox, Canadian, grew up in Canada, and we found a clip when he received his Order of Canada award and his acceptance speech. He thanked Mr. Dressup, right? Because for him, that was such a moment in time of, again, much like my story talking about an inspiration, for Michael J. Fox, it was really about, seeing someone on screen who could put on funny hats and do funny things and like really play with his body on screen to get people to laugh. It was like that really inspired him. So hearing that story, that we happened to find, then going and connecting with him, and then absolutely was happy to participate. There, timing issues and health issues and all kinds of other things to actually connect with him. But it was wonderful to have him on camera and telling his story of really how he was inspired, as one example. So, for us, it was about finding and navigating that path, and hearing those voices and seeing. We also, it was interesting. We did a press release that we were making the film, and then that was a great tool to have certain people come out of the woodwork who had been on the show and perhaps had lost touch with the industry, left the industry, were quite a bit older. And so we had people that had been on the show who wanted to share their stories, and so we were able to find some of those people that wouldn't have been on our radar previously, but they contacted us and reached out to us because they wanted to participate. And there was just so much love, and you never know. The Bare Naked Ladies are in the film, and they're just such great guys and telling the story. And just one quick anecdote, but like I love the story they're telling. And again, we wanted to interview them because obviously they're well known. They grew up watching Mr. Dressup, and they had this incredible story of one time in their careers they were performing at a show with Ernie, and they said it was just so exciting because of course the childhood icon. And so Ernie was on just before them, I think, and then afterwards they were all backstage and they were having a beer, which of course for them was like, we're having a beer with Mr. Dressup. This is about the coolest thing you could ever do. And so they were just, sitting backstage and having a beer, and it was a bottle of beer, which is important. And you take the bottle caps off, and they were on the table. And, Ed went to throw them out, and Ernie grabbed them, put them in his pocket. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm saving those for crafts. Right. And that was just who he was. Right. It's just like that was just such to me, that's such a story of, really, what was important to him about, you collect things, share things, you want to make, crafts accessible that anybody could do it. And just such a wonderful, warm story and good reminder of what he was really all about.
It's such a great story, an amazing actor. And I guess the other thing as well is you had thousands and thousands of hours of shows to select clips from and outtakes and everything else. What kind of a task was that to find those bits that you wanted to kind of support the storytelling and the things people were discussing in their interviews?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's it's a treasure trove of over 4,000 episodes of the series. But I think the thing that everyone has to always remember, because people have contacted us, oh, can you find the episode that I was on in 1982? And it's like, well, first of all, there's no database, there's no list. I mean, it's a different world. I mean, the way we make content now, of course, all of this would be entered into a system. It would be meta tagged, and you could easily go and search it and find it. Like in many cases, we're talking about most of it being digitized, some of it still being on tape, a lot of episodes lost. And so we had to find episodes that had been recorded, because you got to remember at that time period, tape was relatively new and very, very expensive. So what was happening a lot of times is you would make a show, you'd record it, you'd play it back, and then you'd tape over it, right? And so there were a lot of episodes of all kinds of shows during that time period that were lost because nobody ever thought that people would watch content again, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So, there were episodes that were missing. Luckily, there were, some people on the crew and others who had grabbed copies of them. So we found all kinds of content in other places. The CBC was really wonderful, though. say, in terms of, then they maintain a great archives department. They've got, both, amazing still photos that were just like behind the scenes still photos that we'd never seen before that were beautiful. And they have a great system for tracking all of their archives, especially on the still photo side. And then on the video side, just, again, helping us figure that out. But again, you could find the episode and it's like, well, I don't know, who's that person on screen? Okay, we got to figure out who that person is. Were the rights cleared for that? Okay. There was one, they were singing a Beatles song. It's like, I don't think those rights were ever cleared. So we're not going to use that clip in our film. So it was a different time, right? So yes, it was amazing and incredible to have those archives. And you could find a clip that illustrates any point, right? You've got Eric McCormack talking about the sound of, when it was cutting and making a dragon costume. And it's like, oh, we can find that clip, right? Or, there are a number of people talked about a clip that I don't remember because it was before my time, but where, Mr. Dressup had made soup for Casey, and Casey didn't want to eat the soup, even though he had to go and make the soup. And they got a little angry with Casey because, he'd gone and got the soup from Susan down the hall. And anyway, and to hear people like, even in Michael J. Fox's interview, he remembers that episode, right? And again, any parent can relate to it, right? Your kid wants something and they complain about it. Finally, you go and you make it and everything else, and they're like, yeah, I'm not hungry, right? And so it's just like, it was one of those episodes. So it was like, well, we got to find it. And that was one of the black and white episodes from the early days. So it's like, digging in the archives, trying to find this episode. And we did. Again, thank goodness for the team at CBC that helped us navigate those waters. And we had a great research team on the film, an archives team, a clearance team to go through and find all of these old episodes and then, find the clips that were appropriate. But yeah, there was a lot of content.
Yeah, I felt like that soup scene in particular, it was a moment where a lot of people remembered it because they were like, hey, he's talking to a child about their feelings and
Yeah.
validating how each other, and I felt like, when you had that clip, you had so many people seem to have remembered it. Michael J. Fox, obviously, but
Yeah.
It was great that like people learned life lessons from those moments, and then you could just go, oh, we'll just pull it out the archives.
Exactly. And it's great. I mean, the beauty of the film, we make it look like that easy. Of course, we just find it and then we insert the clip and it's easy, but there's a whole team of people digging and finding those clips. And I think things like that are important because it does kind of like, you always have different memories of what you recall, obviously, from shows and what you actually took away. But you realize, there was a lot of great life lessons that, the show didn't set out with an educational mandate and, say, well, we have to be kind and we have to say this 3 times an episode and we have to, they didn't have any of those mandates. They did it because they believed in it, right? And they really believed in the value of putting goodness in the world. That came from Ernie, that came from Judith, who was the puppeteer for Casey and Finnegan. That came from just their ethos of what we should be doing and how they wanted to project and how they wanted to give kids a safe place and all of those things. So, it's quite remarkable, all of those things that they thought about that just were embedded in what they did and the stories that they told.
The other aspect that really jumped out to me was the Fred Rogers connection, which I didn't grow up in Canada, so Mr. Dressup is very new to me, and I learned a lot about it from the film, obviously. But I knew of Fred Rogers because he's like an American icon, but I had no idea that his birthplace was with the CBC in Canada largely.
Yeah. And most people don't know that. I mean, and that's one of those interesting surprises in the film. People often say, oh, Mr. Dressup, he's like our Mr. Rogers. And then when you tell people, well, actually, they were best friends. They came to Canada together. Mr. Rogers actually started on the air in Canada at the CBC, who gave him his first chance to be on television. And he and Ernie came together, were lifelong friends. I mean, Fred was the best man at Ernie's wedding. Like, it's just that they wrote letters back and forth. Like, it's really remarkable up until the months before they died. Like, they just really had a connection, those two. And they believed in the same values, right? All of those ideas of, again, looking directly into the camera, treating kids with respect, kindness being at the core of what you do, empathy, like all of those values they shared, right? And so it's really remarkable, the connection that they had and the fact that they came to Canada. I mean, it's an interesting moment in time when you think about like the role the CBC played of really being, they had the largest kids development department of any broadcaster in the world. They invested in kids content. They had this incredible genius running the kids department who basically went and poached all of these, individuals who were doing interesting things, a lot of them at PBS affiliate stations. Even the Friendly Giant came to Canada that way as well too, and said, come to Canada and let's make this great, amazing place at the CBC where we can incubate and develop really cool kid shows and do things that other people aren't doing. And that's what happened. And he invested in people, he believed in them, and really, nurtured talent, right? And so hearing, that Fred Rogers story, it's pretty special, right? In terms of when you think about what those men had and what they were, able to do together and the opportunities that they were given by the CBC.
It's interesting. They kind of created a whole generation of like you're saying, friendly, warm, kind child programming across a whole continent, pretty much,
Yeah.
which is, you know, a
Oh,
great partnership. They both kind of divvied up the territories and kind of did their own thing.
absolutely. And it just happens so organically, right? And it's interesting, right? And like, and it continues. Like I look at, what the Fred Rogers company, has evolved into, and they have Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is obviously Daniel Tiger, which is a character from, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and Daniel Tiger was actually created when Fred was here at CBC. So to me, it's an incredible full circle story, right? Where
Mm.
those characters, the sets, all of that was actually created when he was at CBC. He left, to go back to the US to create that show. But it's incredible the legacy that continues from just being in Canada, by being able to bring together a whole bunch of really great talent, to give the tools, to invest as required, and just focus on making great content for kids.
One of the things you highlighted really well as well was the fact that you look back at old programs and they can be immensely problematic due to attitudes at the time. And this show is not burdened with any of that, really.
No.
In fact, you have a few voices talking about Casey, and the kind of non-gender of Casey was so far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
People probably didn't comprehend any of it. And that Casey could speak to any child, I guess.
Exactly. And I think that, again, that came from the values of the show that they had. That, again, to me, what's so interesting is we spend a lot of time now worrying about a mandate, and obviously we need to have rules, and we understand that. But back in those days, it wasn't about that. It was really creator led, where the values were really came from the creator. And, you had to hope that they had good values. And this show did. Like, it really just right at its core. And I look at both Ernie and Judith Lawrence, and together the magic that they had and the values that they had, they were ahead of its time, right? Like, I mean, just even that idea, I mean, Judith just really believed and instilled this idea, that, especially on gender parity, there was no, she made sure it wasn't a, men do this and women do that. And she quickly, made sure in a very natural way that you try to avoid some of those gender stereotypes, which are so easy to fall into, if you're not careful in writing, and in kids shows, some people just make assumptions. But really worked with that, and really worked with the writers, and found ways so that it really was natural. So it was like that on screen, behind the scenes, it was the same way. I mean, Ernie advocated for equal pay for Judith, because he believed that men and women should make the same. I mean, again, this was, late 60s and 70s, like, talk about ahead of its time. But again, he didn't do it because it was a mandate. He did it because he believed in it, and he believed that was fair, right? And so I
Mm.
think it would happen behind the scenes, it happened in front of the camera. I mean, there was diversity in the writing room, because again, he believed you should hear different voices. Like, again, just all of that ethos that was built in how the show was constructed, and in what you saw on screen, and it was genuine, right? Like, that's really what they wanted to convey, and that message of kindness, that message of creativity, of inspiration, like really trying to connect with every kid, that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. Like, it's really empowering. But they did it without, sometimes kid shows can be very pedantic, or they can be, too preachy, or looking down and telling the kid what they should do. And, we all know that doesn't work. But when you connect with them on a kid level, and meet them where they are, and, inspire them, and, instill the values of confidence and creativity, eh, you know, eh, you're setting kids up for success in the future. Right. And I think that's what the show really did.
Also, I guess there was no backlash to those messages or how it was conveyed at a time when attitudes were arguably more entrenched, I guess, and systematically entrenched.
Yeah.
So it's a testament to the kind of gentle kindness that was kind of built into that show.
Well said. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't about, trying to preach a message. It was trying to
Mm.
showcase, inclusivity. And it was trying to showcase the idea that, especially in the case of Casey, it didn't matter if you were a boy or a girl, however you saw Casey, that was your connection. If you saw Casey as a boy, as I did, because I was, my boy, I was growing up as a boy. I was like, that's how I related. I thought Casey was a boy. Right. And then I know my wife saw Casey as a girl. Right. That's just, and that's the thing, right? And that's kind of the beauty of it, and Judith, and that was part of her thinking, early on in creating Casey, is that she really wanted to have a puppet that all kids could connect to, right? And that was, slightly mischievous, that had that superpower of being able to, obviously with the pet dog, being able to hear, because Finnegan didn't speak, she could, or he could, hear and connect with Finnegan, and hear and interpret what Finnegan was saying, and was just, again, a great character to be able to, play in the treehouse, to come inside, to hang out with Mr. Dressup. And Casey was, again, like kind of like, as a kid, your eyes and ears of, you related to Casey, you aspired to be Casey. Wouldn't that be amazing to hang out all day in a treehouse and play with Mr. Dressup? Like, there was a real connection that was, I think, for the child to be able to see through Casey's eyes the wonder of the series. I think was a really special connection that, it still resonates with people today.
One of the most powerful moments of the film for me was the scene where he's singing the song after he tragically has lost his wife and is coming back to the studio. And totally by accident, they pick a song that is immensely irrelevant to him in that moment in his life. And you can kind of see this just look in his eye. But he's still incredibly sad, but also incredibly warm and full of love. I can't imagine how it must have felt finding those pieces and put them together in the edit suite and then trying to, you must have agonized over how do we put this together.
For a long time, and it's a beautiful moment because it's with he and Fred Penner. It was interesting because Fred Penner had a show which sat right next to Mr. Dressup on the schedule, so they were always friendly with each other. They knew each other. They both did appearances on each other's show, and kind of cross promoted each other. And Fred, again, also a tour across the country. He was pretty well known, and so that episode had been planned for quite a while. They were going to do this crossover episode on Fred's show that Ernie was going to come on. They were going to do some crafts and moments, and then they were going to sing this song. So all of that had been planned months in advance, right? And then, as you point out, it's a really sad moment. I remember the day actually, as a kid when Ernie's wife tragically died in Toronto, and I think, again, it's one of those things where you would imagine most people would say, okay, we're just going to take a step back. As Fred had said, called Ernie right away and said, I'm sorry, let's just put this on pause. We'll do it again sometime in the future. And Ernie said, well, no, I mean, I want to do this. My wife and I had talked about it. This is really important to me. I want to do it. So there's an example of like, to tell that story, we needed that interview with Fred, and Fred could connect with it. And hearing Fred now in hindsight tell that story of how impactful it was for him. I mean, he said it was the most emotional episode he'd ever shot because it hit you can watch, as you say, in that scene of Fred's show, you can actually watch the moment where each of the men kind of realize that the words they're singing and how impactful they are. And he said, yeah, it was powerful. I mean, I wish we had some more behind the scenes of what that was like to film that episode. We didn't. We were able to find that moment, which was great, and be able to include that. But it was, yeah, it's really, really a powerful scene. I think it's a testament to the professionalism, obviously, of both men to be able to do that and continue and pull that off. And to Ernie as well about how much he felt, connected and committed to kids, and really wanted to go out there, really wanted to perform with Fred, and really wanted to do that.
On a lighter note, one of the one of the scenes that made me laugh was his citizenship rap, which I thought it was very
Yes.
90s. I loved it.
Yeah.
But
It's too bad we didn't have more time because that goes on for a while, and there's a longer dance number, and we had to condense it a little bit. But that's amazing. He was so proud of that. Like hearing his kids talk about it, like I think that was just such an incredible moment because again, it goes to the fact that like again, most people didn't realize that Ernie was American. First of all, I mean, he'd been on the air on CBC for 30 years. So people didn't realize he was American. It truly was a letter from a kid who'd written to him about a school project that kind of inspired him of like, I should probably get my Canadian citizenship, which is telling in terms of how well he connected with audiences. And then, to go and do that performance. And I'm glad we found it because that one, our team had to really dig and find that performance, which was from Canada Day in Ottawa. So it was great to be able to include that.
when you kind of touched on to his retirement and the final episode, one of the things that you were able to do was, I felt like you'd built so much behind the scenes. You were able to really kind of explore and linger and kind of really emotionally dive into how everyone felt on that day.
Yeah.
And to me, I kind of read it as you kind of captured like almost like a historical moment. That you could do a heritage minute on
Yes.
his final episode record.
Well, it was, and it was neat because we found news footage from other networks actually, which is always incredible, covering that last episode. We found the behind the scenes that they had shot, that people had shot on the day. We found just as many different perspectives, and again, that's what's always challenging when you're doing these historical moments in time of figuring out, well, you can have talking heads, but how do you bring that to life, right? But then all the different tools of, one of the performers who was there who kept a diary, who could show us, they'd kept it from that day, obviously with photos, news footage, the rehearsal footage, that moment when Ernie addresses the camera in the rehearsal. My goodness, I tear up at that moment, because that's just so, you're just watching him being so, appreciative of the crew and everybody who had taken him to this point. So finding all of that and kind of putting that together, and as you say, telling that moment in time, and it's beautiful. I mean, he's going out on his own terms. He's making that call to end the show, and while everyone is celebratory, it was obviously an incredibly sad moment, because it's a sad moment when you end any show, because you realize that it's everyone's moving on. You're not going to be together the same way, and there's an end of an era. But I mean, that truly was an end of an era. I mean, 4,000 episodes. You just don't see that happen. And so I think for such a journey for so many people, some of whom had been there since day one, I think there was a real sense of loss, that it was never going to be the same as it had been.
And one of the bare naked ladies, sorry, I don't know all their names,
That's fine.
describes Ernie as untarnished,
Yeah.
looking back historically. And I feel like we live in an age where everyone's tarnished to a certain degree. What lesson did you learn from, like, you obviously had a personal connection to this, and you've gone deeper than most people ever would have from this filmmaking process. But what lesson have you taken, like, moving forward in life or in filmmaking from this production?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I mean, it was Ed from the Bare Naked Ladies who shared that story, right? And I think it's something that we all think about in that way of, like, okay, you meet your childhood hero. Um, are they going to be what Do they live up to those expectations? Everyone's human, right? And so you think, okay, I'm going to meet, and I think what's amazing about Ernie, we heard this time and time again, and I can say it myself as well, like, he was the same person. His family said that, like, and so having a chance to meet him, that's who he was, right? And so I think it's a good reminder for all of us. I mean, everybody has a bad day. Let's be, we're all human. But just to be your authentic self, right? And just being, what you say is what you do. And it doesn't matter if the cameras are on, doesn't matter if we're recording, or doesn't matter if we're hanging out and having a beer, like being a good person, right? It's just kind of simple, right? But people forget that. And I think it's just, treating everyone with kindness and respect. Again, simple lessons, right? But I think they're so critical. And I think it's foundational. You learn them in childhood, you carry that throughout your life. But I think it's just one of those things that sometimes you need to be reminded of, right? That it really is about, seeing the good and being the good in the world and putting it out there. That's what he did.
Mm. Oh, amazing. Are you excited for your screening at the festival in September?
Absolutely. I can't wait. No, I'm looking forward. It's been a couple of years, again, since I've been to the Atlantic Film Festival, and really looking forward to it. It's great to be obviously back in the Maritimes as a proud New Brunswicker. I'm looking forward to being back for it, and it's just something so special about being able to see the film on the big screen. Because I think it's just, and to be surrounded by friends, family, the public, and having a chance to really share the story and seeing it up on screen, because I think it's the type of story that, I often tell people about this film, like, it's going to feel like a warm hug. And for me, what I love too, and it's funny because I was just in St. John, New Brunswick last weekend, right by St. John High. For me, it's coming back to my roots, right? Because it's where I started. It's where I obviously grew up. It's where East Coast is where I met Ernie, the very first time, that set me on this inspiration. So that's another reason why I'm so delighted to be bringing the film, back to the Maritimes, to be able to actually showcase it in Halifax and be able to share it with lots of people, including other fellow Maritimers, and really have this great moment of celebration of, really, enjoying the story and sharing it with so many people in September. I can't wait.
And if people aren't, like, lucky enough to join you and attend that kind of screening in person, it's going to be on Amazon Prime Video afterwards, I believe.
It is, yes. With the date has not been announced. It'll be some point later this fall, so the date will be announced soon. I'm not exactly sure when it will be announced, but it will be on Amazon Prime Video later this fall, and then next year at a certain point as well, it'll be on CBC. They're our partner as well on the project.
Anyone in Canada can enjoy it anyway. It's
Exactly.
great.
Exactly. Anyone in Canada and around the world. I mean, what's great about Prime Video, it's going to be released globally, all around the world, being dubbed in multiple languages, the story shared with the world, because yes, it is it's a Canada story. It's a North American story. But I think, more than ever, the story of kindness and caring and creativity and empathy, and building bridges and just being a good person. It's kind of a lesson that we can all get reminded of, and it's pretty universal to be able to share with people all around the world.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing extra insight on your film. I really enjoyed it and learned so much as an immigrant. I learned so much about a part of Canada that I knew nothing about before. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your kind words, and I really, really appreciate it, and really enjoyed the conversation today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the 2023 Atlantic International Film Festival podcast. Don't forget that this guest and many more will be showcasing the best of international cinema across Halifax from September 14th to the 21st. You can find out more about the events and book tickets by visiting atlanticfilmfestival.ca. I've been Rhys Waters. Now go watch a movie.